Hello and welcome to CG Visuals. My name's Zach, and today we're going to be learning how to create this particle system inside of After Effects. Everything you see here was generated from the ground up in After Effects using the Advanced Lighting plugin and the Trapcode Particular plugin. And I'll talk you through how to create this. There's quite a few different techniques in it. It's quite a long tutorial, but the amount of techniques that we're going to cover, I'm sure it'll be worth the time. So let's get started then. Okay, so the first step to creating this effect is to create some custom lightning, which we're going to use as a particle sprite. So once we've loaded up After Effects, we'll click on Create New Composition, give it a name, give it a sensible duration, make sure the resolution is on 1080p, that's this one, put the resolution to full. Okay, so then we'll right click, go New Solid, call this Sparks or something. It's basically going to become our lightning sprite. Okay, I'll put this in our comps folder just to keep things organized. So we're going to be using a plugin called Advanced Lighting, but we're going to try and use it in a slightly different way. So this is the sort of default state of the plugin. Now we're actually going to be working from an animation preset I created earlier because having tried to sort of prepare for this, I can see how long and finicky it can take to get the lightning the way we want. So to save a bit of time, I'm going to load up a preset I made earlier and then use that as a guide to help us set the lightning for the other one. So this is what we're going to be aiming to create. It's just sort of a white mat of some sort of electrical sparks, which will be quite useful. But let's go through how to create this with the lightning plugin. I'll just call this, just so I don't get confused. Okay, so the first thing is we're going to set the lightning type to anywhere. And we'll drag this origin point into the center. Now we're going to animate the conductive state with using a shortcut. We Alt left click on the stopwatch and just type time *1. That'll just animate the movement for us. Okay, let's have a look at what we did for the core settings. So for the core settings, I used 5.5. That's going to make the core thicker. The core opacity we put to 100. The glow, we'll just shut that glow off because we're going to add our own glow later on when it comes to compositing it into the simulation. Then turbulence, that was quite an important one. I sort of put it around 0.7 something. The thing with that is that's just going to make your lightning forks go mental, and we want each one of these sprites to be like an individual spark element, so we don't want hundreds of smaller variations coming off of the main core, otherwise it's just not going to look realistic. That was turbulence, wasn't it? Turbulence 0.7. So for the decay, we're using an expression. So we're using a wiggle expression of a speed of 5 and a value of 50. So to do that, on R1 we'll go to the decay and Alt left click, type in our wiggle expression 5,50. And then we can start playing around with the expert settings here. Also, there's a checkbox for decay main core, so we're going to want to click that. And let's have a quick look at the expert settings for the other one. So we had complexity on 6, and then the rest of the settings were fairly unchanged. So we put the core drain to 100, variation to 100, and yeah, that was basically it for the lightning. So let's have a quick look at what we've just created then. Now, if you think that maybe the sparks are happening too often, we can go into the decay and we can increase the decay even further so that the chance of a full-blown sort of bolt will decrease. In theory, there should be more time in between them. Let's try putting the decay up even more. We could also decrease the value in the wiggle expression. So I think we'll leave it as that. This is why the tutorials drag on for ages, because I can never decide on anything. Okay. Well, we'll reset the, so not the lightning plugin, I'll have to do it all again. Reset the transform properties. Delete the reference, so we've just got our lightning sprite. And then just render out as much as you want. I mean, if you're wondering how to create, I mean, we could go to the lightning type and we could make it maybe like a strike. So it could be like lightning striking or something. That might be quite cool. What else do we have? Directional. That's just the direction. Omnidirectional. Quite similar to what we've already got. Braking might be an interesting one. Of course, we've pretty much nerfed the fork properties, so it's basically just the core. But we could get some different crazy looks. Not that we'd want to have anything as insane as that. Do just want to try and keep this quite simple. That's another thing as well. We can decide how far out we want these little bolts to come, which is quite useful since we're just trying to create a sprite. In fact, we'll then go into the composition settings and change the width and the height to something like 400. It's just that when we try to use these as a sprite, especially as a video file sprite, if the resolution is much more than 300 by 300, it's really going to be slow to work with. So we don't really want each of these sprites to be too dramatic. Would be tempting just to have a tiny bit of forking, but I don't really know how much we can get away with without. I think that's pretty good. I mean, that's actually better than I expected, considering this is a live tutorial. So when you're happy with that, we'll go to composition. We'll just click on pre-render or add to render queue. In the format box, you want to go for a QuickTime and the channels, we want RGB, sorry, and alpha. And then we'll use in the video codec, we'll use an animation because that is a lossless format. Just click OK, and then just click render, and you're done. Okay, I'll see you in a moment for the next part of the tutorial. Okay, so in this part we will start setting up our particle system. So with the electrical sprite that we created in the first part, we'll drag that into a new composition, and we'll also create a new composition, call it particles. We'll organize a little bit, and then we'll drag our electrical sprite into the composition so we can have a look at it. We'll shut that off for now. We'll right click, new solid, click OK, and then we'll apply Trapcode Particular to this solid. Right, so let's start setting this up. So we don't need that many particles to be emitted. Yeah, the velocity, I don't think we really need much velocity. We'll put it to be a emission type as a sphere, so they won't all emit from the same place. We will go into the particle settings next, and we'll just put, let's see, if we put the life down to about 2 seconds, I think. Randomize that a little bit, put the size up, and then we'll choose the particle type to be a sprite, and for the texture we'll select our electrical sprite. There's that warning talked about earlier, as it's more than 300 by 300, I'm getting a little warning message. And in the current time we could choose it to start at birth and play once. We can also randomize the rotation here. We can also randomize play once. So this will give us more of a random look. In fact, I might even bring the life down even more. We want to create quite a random look. So randomize the size. Put a tiny bit of rotational speed on it. As the particles overlap, we want the blending mode to be a screen. Let's give it some air resistance, and then we can have that air resistance apply to the rotation as well. And of course we can just tone the rotation down quite a bit. Then in the particle settings, we'll go for size over life and create a custom curve by just drawing on the box. Play around with this curve just a little bit. Now, if we want to make changes to the particles, I mean, perhaps we don't particularly like these little dots that sort of appear before the strikes happen, we can go into our particle sprite here and we could play around with this. So you could do, I mean, you could keyframe the opacity. I'm just using this layer now to see when the strikes happen, because in the active layer we've keyframed the opacity to be off. So make sure you have the layer selected when you animate the keyframes. So every time, a few frames before each strike, we're just going to start keyframing this in. Doesn't take as long as you'd think. Okay, excellent. Let's leave that as that. Then we go back to our particles and have a little look at the changes. Sometimes it doesn't update the cache if you don't change the resolution. That's an issue I sometimes have. So if I make a bunch of changes and they don't seem to be taking effect, I'll just change the resolution. And that normally does the job. So that's creating quite a volatile look, which is what we're going for. We'll randomize the size even more. Okay, excellent. So I think we'll leave that for the electrical jolts there. Then we'll create some more particle systems. We'll disable this one. This one, the first one we'll do will just be some ordinary sparks. So the smaller sparks that emit as the electrical sparks happen. So these are just going to be sparks. We will just put the emitter down, put the velocity up, go into the particles, have them 2 seconds, randomize the life, have the size over life decrease. That's fine. Transfer mode screen, go into the physics section, have them be use air, give them some air resistance and a bit of gravity. The spine amplitude will give some randomization to the sparks. Okay, I'll do it for that. Go give it some motion blur. Add a bit of opacity boost just to compensate. Bring the life down a bit more, I think. And slightly less gravity, and that will do it. You can play around the settings further. Okay, next we'll create some smoke for the system as well. For the smoke, we're going to use a smoke sprite, which will be included in the download link. We'll use this for the smoke. So let's just set the smoke up as well. In fact, it'll probably just be easier to duplicate the sparks and work on the particle system that we already just set up. So we'll choose the particle type to be a sprite and choose the smoke sprite. Randomize the rotation, bring the size up, bring the opacity down, get rid of the opacity boost. Bring the velocity randomization down, bring the size randomization down, bring that up. Can play with the random seed a little bit. Go to the opacity over life, have them fade out, and have the size increase. I always try to go for a logarithmic styled curve. Have a quick look at that. I'll decrease the air resistance, decrease the gravity, and decrease the velocity. And randomize it just a little bit. That'll do for our smoke. the next thing we're going to do is create a null object, and we'll attach a slider control to the null object. Now if we drag our window up here to make this a little bit easier to see, we're going to go to our, just going to give these some names. Now what we want to do is have the slider control all of the emission properties for all of the particle systems that we have. Otherwise we're going to have to go in and keyframe all of them individually, and we won't be able to update the changes globally. Where having this slider will allow us to do that. It takes just a few moments. You alt left click on the stopwatch and drag the pick whip tool to the slider stopwatch. It would make sense to do this at the beginning so that when we duplicate the particle systems, we don't actually have to do this. Now if we turn everything back on and we go to the slider, we can start increasing the particle emission for everything. Go to the electrical one here. We can go to physics. We could decrease the physical timescale, so that means we'll have less particles being emitted compared to everything else. But I think we'll just leave that as normal. Put the life down. We want those electrical bolts to be quite quick. Put the particle amount down a bit. I think for the smoke, we'll probably go and decrease the amount of smoke that's being emitted on that one. Now the next thing we want to be able to do is to have the lightning illuminate the smoke, so that the smoke is only visible when the lightning occurs. So to do that, we'll just shut off these sparks so we can see this a bit better. We'll duplicate the electrical particle system. We'll put that below the smoke. We'll also duplicate the smoke as well and turn that off. And then with the electrical particle system selected, if we click this button down here, which expands the rest of the options, the transfer control panel, we can go to the track mat and we can choose the electrical layer to be a luma mat for the smoke layer, which is above it. It will automatically shut the smoke layer off. And now the smoke layer will only be visible through the mat of the electricity that we have. Now, obviously we can't see it yet, but if we start adding some glows and blurs, we can start having the smoke be illuminated. I'd have to duplicate this a couple of times. So I'm making multiple copies of a glow in the same layer, and then I'm just giving different values to the glow radius. Duplicate it again. We'll also give it a Gaussian blur as well. Put that at the beginning before we applied all of the glows though. So it's after the particles. Blur that out. And then if we enable the other electrical spark element and play this through, the smoke will only be visible when the particles are being emitted. And if we go into the electrical particles here and decrease the physics time factor, you have to do it in this one. Decrease the physics time factor. Let's reset the view. Disable the null object. This is going to help give the lightning a physical presence because it's actually affecting the smoke. The smoke is only illuminated by the lightning. Of course, it'd be nice to see the smoke a little bit anyway. So if we drag this smoke below all of the other layers, enable it, but then we'll just go into the opacity and put that right down. So then the smoke is still barely visible, but is illuminated considerably by the lightning. I kind of feel like there's way too much velocity on the smoke. I think I'm just going to disable the randomized velocity for the smoke. And I'll change the emission type to a sphere for the smoke as well. Now we haven't even added any fancy glow effects to anything yet, so it's not looking too bad. Let's re-enable the sparks, have a look at that. Probably give the sparks an opacity boost even further. I'll change the sparks to a cloudlet. I think that tends to work better for sparks. Just gives them a bit more punch, if that's even a term. Randomize the size a little bit. Now the cool thing we can do with the null object here is, rather than just having the particles emit, we can add a wiggle expression to the global emission here, 5,25 or something. And then we could have the base emission at 0. Maybe increase that a little bit and have a look and see what that does. I'm going to put the resolution down to half now, just so we get some faster previews. Let's have a look at that. I think we could have even more particles. It's quite creating quite a robust system there. Okay, so we'll call this part 2, and then part 2 is setting up the particles. Part 3 now can be adding some sort of extra fancy effects on top of it to try and sell it. So if you want to take a break, this can be a break point in the tutorial, and then we'll move on to part 3. In this third part of the tutorial, we'll start compositing the glow onto our lightning. Now at this stage in the tutorial, it'd be a good time to change the color bit depth to 32 bits per channel. Since we're dealing with extreme glows, this will help us composite the lightning in a more realistic way. Now because you've changed the bit depth, we'll just have to go back into this electrical 2 layer. This is the layer that is illuminating the smoke only on the flashes. And we'll just have to quickly reapply the glows. The original glows that we had would have been insanely bleached out, so we'll do this in a more sensible way. So first glow can have quite a small glow radius, 33 for the threshold. Duplicate it, increase the radius, play around with the threshold. We can go back to the first one and change how hot the emission point is going to be. I mean, it is an electrical discharge, so it is going to be quite bright. Gonna have to preview it in half res, so it might look a little bit low resolution. We could add just a little bit more glow. We duplicate this one. We can have three. We can have one that can just be for the core. Actually, that seems to be over the top. Let's just keep it how we had it before. 2 glows is nice and simple to manage. If we want it to be brighter, we'll just play around with the threshold and everything. Okay. In some places it might be a bit bleached out, but I mean, it would be bleached out considering how bright it is. Just want to get a balance between having the smoke illuminated in a realistic way and not bleaching everything out entirely. Then if we select our lightning layer, just play around with the blur on that. So select the lightning layer, we'll just add a stylized glow into the mix. We can add a little bit of color to it. And there's 2 ways we could add color. We could go to the A and B colors and change those accordingly. A tritone might work more naturally if we choose blue. Put it to full res, we'll see what we're doing. So that's a way to give color to it. Let's try the other method, A and B. Give A maybe a light blue, give B a darker blue. We go a bit stronger on the colour there. Let's choose a different frame. This is interesting. Because we've got so many glows all building up on top of each other, we're starting to get this issue here where it's so bright, it's going beyond a value that the camera can capture. And so it's displaying the pixels as burnt out pixels. Now we can eliminate this by changing the blending mode to lighten. Although actually if you change the glow operation to screen, that seems to prevent the build up. So then we could have 2 glows, one for the outer sort of effect. Also we take this tritone effect and we can paste it to the end of the electrical layer here, and then we can use that to colorize the smoke. So we'll give that a bluish color. Maybe around that sort of level will work. There we go, let's just colour correcting the smoke a bit. We can also blend with the original just a little bit. So let's have a quick preview of this just to see what it looks like. Okay, well let's add the same glow that we did to the sparks. Scroll down to the glow here, change the glow radius. Play around with those settings just a bit. And if you find that there's too much saturation, you can always just control everything with a tritone. Set that to a grey, maybe. And then blend it with the original I just delete the glow and just stick with the one. Okay, so I'm going to give this a quick pre-render and then we'll have a look at it. Okay, now that that's rendered, let's take a quick look at what we've got. So I think randomizing the values does work because we haven't even really had to animate this. We're just allowing the particle system to decide when. And it does a better job at creating a sort of random, chaotic look than I think you'd be able to achieve with hand-placed assets. So we can continue to play around with that a bit. I mean, like maybe decrease the opacity of the smoke. I'm not sure. Maybe in the video you might not even be able to see it, but I like the idea of it only really being visible when the lightning goes off. Okay, well, let's put this to half res. We're going to add a few more extra. It depends how much time we have really, doesn't it? But there is one extra effect I think is worth mentioning. If we just go create new solid and then go effect, noise and grain, fractal noise. And what we're going to create here is grit on the lens that can be illuminated by the intense flashes. So contrast up, brightness down, transform scale down, brightness up even more, contrast down even more. We just want to create those specks of dirt on the lens. And then we'll go and apply the lens blur. Don't you even think about it. Okay, right. Lens blur. Yeah, I should save it really, shouldn't I? Okay, it's saved. Okay, so we put the lens blur on, but we need to change the overflow here to not allow HDR results. We want to clip the results so that the lens blur can do what it needs to do. Look at that, lens grit. And we will, yeah, give it the tritone that we made. No, wait, where's the tritone that we made? There it is. Apply that to the lens. Blend with original a little bit. If you want to bring down the amount of grit on the lens, we can just bring down the brightness, play around with the lens blur, although I think it would probably be quite blurred out if it's on the lens. And then we'll choose screen for this. And the trick with this is we only want the lens to be illuminated when the intense flashes happen. So it's quite easy to do. We'll just duplicate this overblown electricity layer here, and we'll just set it to be a luma matte for the lens grit here. So call that lens. So if we just solo this layer, have a quick look at what it's doing. So we need it to go off only when the electrical sparks go off. So I think we'll need this to be a screen mode. Have a quick look at this, make sure this is doing its thing. Ah, okay. It's my mistake. I need to make sure that make sure I'm on the first frame when I duplicate this layer. Let's have a quick look at it, make sure it's Okay, awesome. Then we'll reapply the Lumimat. Okay, awesome. So the reason we can't see the lens is because we basically need to Gaussian blur the hell out of it. There we go. Start increasing these blurs a bit. There we go. We can actually start seeing the lens grit now. Okay, so now when the lightning goes off, it's going to illuminate grit on the lens in a realistic way. Let's give that a quick preview, see what it looks like. I'll preview it in quarter res just to save time. Just need to check that it's working. Also, by the time every time you duplicate a layer, it basically randomizes the seed in all of the other layers. So all these particles are completely randomized again, completely different than what it was like before, which is okay. We're completely going over the top with this lens blur effect. It does not need to be that intense. So let's start bringing up these a little bit. Bring up the threshold just to bring it down. Go to full res and we see what we're doing. We don't want the entire effect to be about the lens grit, do we? It's just a thing. You probably won't even notice it, but it'll go some ways into helping to sell the effect. Next thing you could do is create an adjustment layer. Actually, scratch that. The grain is better applied to everything once you've pre-composed it. Just call it electrical. Okay, now let's apply add the grain now that we've pre-composed it. You see, it has an alpha channel, right? So the grain is only affecting the elements, but however, we want the grain to affect everything, help it all blend together. So we're going to have to add a black solid to the bottom of this. So we now don't have the alpha channel anymore. So okay, but now we can use our grain to grain the hell out of everything in a completely unrealistic way. You see what it's doing? It's just, I guess this is optional, you don't have to do it. I mean, but you are going to want some grain in it. No camera in the world can capture anything without some kind of grain. If you really want that alpha channel, you can get it back after we've done the add noise by going channel, set matte. And we'll choose the blue channel since everything's basically blue. Or maybe it'd be more sensible to do luminance or perhaps lightness. They will have slightly varying results. And then we'll go remove color matting. And you see, by doing this, it has affected the color a little bit. So that's why I thought maybe blue might do a better job at keeping the color. And now it has the alpha channel again. So to be honest, this type of asset doesn't need an alpha channel. It's just a white glow on a black background. The only thing you're going to do with it is right click, blending mode, screen or add. So to be honest, having the alpha channel on this really isn't necessary, but you still have the option if you'd like to. Okay, so in the next and final part of the tutorial, we'll have a quick look at compositing this into some sort of live action plate background, and just look at some sort of lighting that we can do to help sell the effects. So we'll move on to part 4. Okay, so welcome back to the fourth and final part of the tutorial, where we're going to look at compositing our asset into a live action environment. So to make that easier, the first thing you'll want to do is render out what we've got so far. So for this, I would use a QuickTime with a animation video, animation as the video codec. Click OK to that. Use the current settings. If you did change the 32 bits back to 8 bits, just make sure you choose the 32 bits per channel option. And that will make sure we render out with all of the detail that we gave to it. So just give it a name, click render, and you're done. And then you'll have this pre-rendered MOV QuickTime file, which we can then use in our footage. So when you have your footage in After Effects, just drag it into a new comp. Whilst we're editing this, the comp only needs to be 8 bits per channel. We'll drag our asset in. Before we do anything, it'd be a good idea to just trim down the footage. Make sure we don't have any unwanted bits. Like there's a bit of a jump there at the beginning, so I'm going to trim that out. That's Alt and left bracket to trim the in point. Same here, don't want the camera move, so Alt right bracket, left click, shift drag, or snap into place. Select the preview cache here, preview region, and just left click, shift drag. Okay, then we'll track our footage. So make a null object, select the footage, click track motion, make sure we've got the resolution set to full when we do this. We'll once we've got that done, we'll just click analyze, let it do its thing. Once it's tracked, we'll edit the target to null object 6 and click apply. Tracking data has been applied. Then we can bring in our electrical asset. We can change the blending mode to screen, hide the null object, find a decent frame and just position it where we want, and pick whip it to the null object so that it stays in place. Next thing we'll do is duplicate it. On the bottom layer here, we'll add a fast blur. This is going to be used to create the overall sort of outer glow. So we'll go down to effect stylize glow, and we'll just play around with this. Just something this bright will give off quite a lot of ambient sort of light, especially will help to sell the grit on the lens being illuminated as well. Play around with the I would not use additive for the glow, because it's actually decreasing the opacity of what we can see behind the glow, which is more realistic. Now the glow needs to affect the environment. Now the best way to do the lighting effect is to duplicate the footage and change it to an additive mode. However, we're going to need the mask to be tracked to the footage, because we want to do quite a lot of masking. Now, because there doesn't seem to be any obvious way to apply the tracking data from the null object to the mask, and because we don't want to do it frame by frame, we're going to create a matte, a black solid. For the purposes of this, we'll make it just a bit bigger than it needs to be, and then we'll parent that to the null object as well. So now our black solid will move with the footage. Now instead of you doing our roto on the duplication of the footage, we'll do our roto on the matte here, on the black solid. And because we will only have to do it for this one single frame, we can afford to take a little bit longer, being a bit more accurate with what we put in our matte. So I'm going to rush this as quickly as possible, just to really illustrate. Pick a few areas that you think might be affected. And don't forget to do some area of effect lighting. If we just solo this layer, let's have a look at what we're doing. So this is the matte that we're creating. Let's create a subtraction mask for this thing. We don't want it to subtract the other masks that we've done. Select the blue and the green and we'll drag them below there. As for this orange bigger circular one, we'll bring the opacity down and feather it a bit, and we'll feather the rest. If I wanted to make this look nice, I'd spend a lot more longer doing this masking. But anyway, this can serve as our matte. So once we've got our matte, the two ways we could use it, as I said, it's tracked in place, quite handy. One way we could do is change the blending mode to stencil alpha. However, that's also going to affect the original footage as well. So we'll change that back to normal. And we will use this as a map for the footage. So if we select the footage, which is the duplication, which is the glow layer, and we ask it to use the black solid 8 as an alpha matte, now the glow is only affecting the parts that we selected. And of course, if you want to make everything look all blurry, we can feather everything even more. This one here. See, I wouldn't go blurring this one crazy. I'd do that and then I'd maybe create a subtraction mask for this. And I'd make sure that that one had lots of blur on it. That's the nice thing about it being tracked, is you can go in, make little changes like this, and they'll filter throughout all of the frames that we've got. Now, to be honest, the easiest way to use this map would be just to animate it with the electricity. So if we solo the electricity and so we're just looking at that, we'll go to the black solid here. I mean, you can either animate the opacity of the black solid or the footage. I guess you might as well do the black solid, since that is what's controlling the mattes. So when we want there to be some sort of effect of lighting, we'll just have the keyframes in here, something like that. Then we'll just select the keyframes, copy them, scroll through, so there's a bit more lightning here. Can have it all animated. You know what? There's actually even a better way to do this. Actually, let's forget about what we just did there. Let's actually add a wiggle expression to the opacity here. So we'll do 100. Well, let's just have a look at the solo this one. We'll just have a quick look at what it's doing. Oh, the audio there. We do not want the audio playing. It's completely blown out. I did not have a boom mic. I would increase the speed of those flashes even more. So they're going to be flashing like that all the time. Now, what's even better then is we can hide that. Go back to, so we're just looking at the electricity. And now we can keyframe the opacity of the footage. So we'll say we want the lighting to happen here, but whilst it's on, it will be subject to the random animation of the matte that we did. So it's giving us more control over how the animation happens. Obviously a bit tedious, but we're not actually having to do that much work for the results we're going to get. We're not even having to do very much work. Okay. So now I think would be a good time to just have a little look at what we've got. We do not need that to be on. There we go. So let's have a little look. So it's working quite nicely. I would give some motion blur to the electrical asset. In terms of getting it to blend into the footage more, I would probably select the asset, go effect, try adding a bit of noise to it. Try add grain. Of course, it doesn't have an alpha channel though, so the grain is going to affect everything. So it'd probably be better to make an adjustment layer and just add a bit of grain to everything. That was a fractal noise. Add grain. 0.2, 0.2 should work. So you can see this is just going to help to blend everything together a bit. We are adding grain into our footage, but we're adding high quality fine grain. So we're not actually degrading the footage. Also, speaking of the footage, let's do a tiny bit of color correction. Or let's make sure we don't overdo the grain. So we'll pre-compose everything we've done. Yeah, pre-comp will do. We'll name everything later. Then what we can do is we can duplicate the footage again with all of the effects. Choose soft light and maybe 20%. All we're doing there is just adding a bit of contrast in. Nothing wrong with that. Then we could even give it that cinematic touch. The height to 800 hit inside this comp and then go back to the other one, and we're not even rendering anything here, so nothing's lost. And then let's go and give this a preview. And my issue with it is I'm not convinced that the camera would be able to capture the lightning in that level of detail. It just wouldn't. I mean, the lightning has more detail than the footage. So definitely need to fix that. So let's go to the lightning and we'll just give it a Gaussian blur of 2, I'd say. Maybe 1. Then we'll go and just adjust some of the masks we have here, like this subtraction masks, bring that in a bit. I wonder if that was all that it needed. And of course we want to add some color correction to to the actual element itself. Yeah, we'll give it a tritone. And we'll just give that more of a blue sort of tinge to it. This is before. Almost looked red, didn't it? After, just tinted it down. Giving it some blur. Actually made sure that the surrounding light is on this time. I think that's actually what was wrong with it before. Let's just really look at it and try and think. I mean, maybe what we could do is add an unsharp mask before the Gaussian blur on the electricity. What this is going to do is basically sharpen it up, but it's actually going to degrade it. So we could do it after the Gaussian blur, perhaps. I mean, let's have a look at the before and after. So that's without the effects. It's with the effects. Doesn't really make that much of a difference. Let's try putting the sharpness after. Really put that sharpness up, I think. Maybe like 150. $175. That's before, that's after. See what we're doing, I'll let the rest of this cache in, I think, and then I might as well just put the finishing touch. We might as well go into the lighting here, just add a tiny tinge of blue. Before, after. I'll just make the lighting match it just a little bit more. Might even go into the asset and just increase the size a bit. Okay, we'll allow this to cache in one final time, and then yeah, and I think we'll see how it looks like. Okay, so we've allowed that to cache in. Let's have a look at what we've managed to create. Nice bit of lightning, electrical sparks. I mean, we just did this over the course of a tutorial. I'm sure if you had more time to fiddle around with it, like there's a few bits in here where the electrical bolts don't look like they're even emitting from the pole there. They're just sort of floating in space. But I mean, overall, I think it has quite a nice look to it. And of course, we could always go back into the particle system and, you know, could whack up the velocity, the emission rate. We could have sort of static electricity happening all over the screen rather than emitting from one point. You know, we could have it just, and we could go right back to when we were creating the sprites, and we could have like a bolt of lightning that's actually connecting with something. Maybe it could be like a really cool force lightning effect or something. But anyway, this has been the tutorial on creating electrical assets inside After Effects. I just thought it was a cool thing to show you because we covered a whole load of topics. We covered using the Advanced Lightning plugin to create our own custom sprite. We rendered that off, then we put that into a particle system that used a global controller for the emission of the particles so that you can control them all together. And then we had the lightning dynamically illuminate the smoke to simulate some more advanced lighting. And then we brought it in and composited it onto a live action plate, and we learnt how to use a matte in After Effects. You track a matte to your footage, and you use that to control the mask for something like this, for like the lighting effects. Whereas if we'd animated this by hand, not only would it have taken ages, but if you wanted to fix something, that would have taken ages as well. So yeah, well, thanks for tuning in to this tutorial. It takes a while to get videos out with, you know, working full time and everything, but no, I've quite enjoyed this and hope you have too. Okay, thanks for listening then.